All right, welcome everyone. My name is Ryan Susky. I'm Director of Programs over at the Ohio Center for Law-Related Education, and I'll be serving as your facilitator for today's hearings. Now, in just a moment, I'm going to go ahead and have the judges introduce themselves before we begin the Unit 4 hearing for the National Invitational. Students are going to deliver a 4-minute prepared statement, followed by 8 minutes of judge follow-up questions. Now, my microphone is going to be muted during the hearing, but I will be holding up the 1-minute and time signs as we go through. So for that reason, I suggest that everyone use gallery view rather than speaker view. At the conclusion of the hearing, the judges will give brief feedback to the teams, and then we will conclude. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand things over to your chairperson to begin introductions.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to introduce ourselves first, and then we'll ask you to introduce yourself. I am Deshawn Whitaker, We the People teacher in Charles County Public Schools in Maryland.
My name is Joe Stewart. I teach in the political science department at a place I hope you've heard of, Clemson University, in another part of South Carolina.
And hi, everyone. I'm Diana Owen. I'm a political science professor at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C.
All right, and would you please introduce yourselves and your teacher?
My name is Sophia Obiana. My name is Eliana Hart. My name is Sadie Case. And our teacher's name is Mr. DeSerbo.
Hello. Great.
All right, thank you very much. And congratulations to making it to the National Invitational. I will now read the first question. An American historian claims that the ratification debates were one of the greatest and most probing public debates in American history. Do you agree or disagree? Why? What evidence can you offer to support your response? Evaluate the major arguments the Federalists advanced in support of the ratification of the Constitution. Evaluate the major arguments the Anti-Federalists put forth in opposition to ratification of the Constitution. Why did a Bill of Rights become a focal point for both the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists? You may begin.
Both parties made many persuasive arguments, but the most effective arguments were whether the Constitution would maintain a Republican government, whether the national government would have too much power, and whether a Bill of Rights was needed in the Constitution. The Federalists handled these disputes with the response the government would be stronger than under the Articles of Confederation, but will still be limited enough to protect the governing of individual states and maintain a Republican setting. Also, the Bill of Rights is not needed in the Constitution because it only will give the people an impression that their only protected rights are the ones listed in the Bill of Rights. As Federalists acknowledge these differences, what you will find is that their disputes were not as necessary as American historians would claim. This would better be because the debates in the states lasted an intense and bitter 10 months. As the Federalists believed the Constitution was remarkable, it was ultimately flawed. The Federalists, stubborn in their ways, fought to keep the Constitution with its flaws, stuck in their ideas of their perfect central government, which in the end of the 10 months resulted in a compromise to get the Constitution ratified and a crucial addition of the Bill of Rights.
The Anti-Federalists were very opposed to the ratification of the 1789 Constitution. The Anti-Federalists believed that the ratification of the Constitution threatened liberties and individual rights. The Anti-Federalists argued against many things they believed were wrong. They argued that the Constitution gave far too much power to the federal government. They also argued that a Bill of Rights should be ratified and a central government should be put into place. They enforced this because they believed that it would protect people's rights. They were very opposed to a strong government because they believed it threatened the sovereignty of the states, and instead leaned more towards a weaker central government. They didn't like how the federal government was given so much power while the states were given very little power. The Anti-Federalists were against these things because they were against the idea of a one strong government. Arguing all these things, Patrick Henry, along with many others, decided to write the Anti-Federalist Papers, stating these arguments to counter and defeat the new Constitution. Even though they were unable to reform the Constitution, they still shaped the idea of a Bill of Rights, which is still in use today.
The Federalists and the Anti-Federalists began a dispute on whether or not we should be able to amend the Constitution with the Bill of Rights. The Federalist argument was that it was not needed because the Constitution is the ultimate protection for the people's rights and sets limits on power of the government. Hamilton argued there remains but one other view to conclude this point. The truth is, after all the declamation we have heard, that the Constitution is itself in every rational sense a Bill of Rights. The several Bills of Rights in Great Britain form its Constitution, and conversely, the Constitution of each state is its Bill of Rights. And the proposed Constitution, if adopted, will be the Bill of Rights of the Union. His belief is that the entire document should set limits and checks and balances on the government so that no individual's rights will be infringed upon. The Anti-Federalists pushed back this idea with the argument that the Constitution was not as protective as the Federalists made it out to be, as it did not include basic human rights such as freedom of speech, press, and assembly. As Thomas Jefferson states, a Bill of Rights is what the people are entitled to against every government on earth, general or particular, and what no just government should refuse.
Thank you for your statement. We're now going to ask some follow-up questions. You mentioned that, sorry, my dogs are barking. They would at this time. You mentioned that the Federalist claims were not supported. Could you elaborate on that?
I apologize. When you mean the Federalist claims were not supported, which part were you talking about?
In your prepared statement, you mentioned about the Federalists had claims that were, you said that their claims were just not, they were like not necessary. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yes, ma'am. I believe that when the Federalists were arguing about whether the Bill of Rights was needed in the Constitution, it did not include basic human rights such as the First Amendment or protection such as the Second Amendment. And I think that honestly, that was not very smart on their part, because many of the rights that were given to them in the Bill of Rights is what people go by today. And in the Constitution, not protecting those certain rights would not have gotten the Constitution passed throughout the states.
To take the opposite view, with the Federalists who believed that the Bill of Rights was not needed because it only gave them the illusion that the only protected rights they had were in the Bill of Rights themselves.
I agree with my partner Eliana, because I think that the Federalists were wrong about thinking that they didn't need a Bill of Rights. Like what I said in my speech, I said that the Bill of Rights is still in use today, and it's still important, and it's still a vital part of our government.
Well, I understand what my partner Sadie is saying. Our 9th and 10th Amendment protects the rights that are not included in our specific Bill of Rights, which was one of the main arguments of the Federalists.
Okay, a lot of the cases that have interpreted people's protections against government have been cases where state and local officials have infringed on people's rights. Does that mean that would the Anti-Federalists have anticipated that? Were the Federalists right? Does that help support the Federalist case?
I believe that when the state governments are pushing back against people, I do not believe that the Anti-Federalists would have interpreted it in that sense. I think Jefferson might have understood that because of them wanting to be able to create their own rights under federalism. And I think it does go under some of the points of the Federalists, saying that if under our central government over the people, that they would protect those rights completely, whereas the states would individually choose different sites and perspectives on especially our First Amendment freedom of speech.
I agree with my partner. I believe that our First Amendment is very important. Like, for example, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. I believe that there's many cases where where that comes in play, and that's important to us.
Yes, I agree with both my partners, especially as they've said with the First Amendment, with freedom of speech, they need to have that ability. And yes, maybe the Anti-Federalists haven't intended that it would be that argued today, but they still have expected that there would be people who would want to stand up for their rights.
Another thing is that if the people feel that way in their local governments, they are able to appeal to the Supreme Court over our central government.
And the Supreme Court ultimately protects your people's First Amendment rights. So the Supreme Court comes into play as well.
So you talk about the fact that the Constitution establishes a Republican government. Could you explain what is meant by a Republican government and perhaps contrast that to a democratic system?
Absolutely. A republic, what the founders originally intended with our Republican government is that the people would vote on a representative that could help them make decisions in their central government and local governments. To contrast that with the democracy, we would be representing ourselves in our government. So if with democracy, we would have a direct influence instead of having a representative come and support us.
I agree with my partner. As you've seen with ancient Rome, they were a democratic republic, and we were influenced by them. And that's how the founders looked at how to set up our government with the Republican government, was setting up our officials to be elected instead of just the people being represented by one person, because it gave them more say and equal rights.
They also took ideas from ancient Greece and how they could have fixed their Republican government so that it wouldn't collapse in the same way as those two governments. You see this in Federalist Papers 9, 10, and 14.
I, along with my partner's founder's point, I believe that the founders set this almost like the skeleton for our American republic. And I believe that is important.
All right. How and why did the states ratifying conventions exemplify the principles of popular sovereignty?
Please.
I apologize. Could you restate the question?
Sure. So you know that there were ratifying conventions, right, in the states. Okay, so how is that an example, and why is that an example of popular sovereignty?
I believe it's a great example of popular sovereignty because when trying to pass the Constitution among the states, the people were able to put in their point of view so that our government would be what the people wanted and not just what where they take examples from Britain where they just had specific rulers deciding for all of the people. They wanted the people to be able to make their own decisions so that we wouldn't turn into such a tyrannical monarchy.
To add on to what my partner was saying, because of popular sovereignty, the people had a say in the bicameral legislative branch, where the smaller states would have had as equal say as the larger states with the Senate, and the larger states would have had their way with the House of Representatives, which was based on population. And because of popular sovereignty and the people having the say in that, it helps out with how long-lasting our Constitution is.
Like what I said in my speech, Great Compromise allowed people to have a say in things like popular. Sorry, the Great Compromise is like popular sovereignty because it allowed people to have a say in a compromise.
Okay, the Constitution has only been amended 27 times, 10 of which you mentioned as the Bill of Rights. Is that evidence that what the Federalists and Anti-Federalists were on? And I'll never know the answer to that question. Time's up. So, thank you.
All right. Thank you for your statements today. I enjoyed hearing your thoughts about the Bill of Rights. You're very strong on the Bill of Rights and putting it into the Constitution. I like your ability to differentiate between a Republican government and a democracy in the follow-up questions. I like that you had an opinion about the Federalists and where the Federalists stood in these arguments and how ultimately they did have to compromise in order to get our Constitution ratified. I enjoyed everything listening to you today, and thank you again.
Yeah, let me echo that, and it's clear you're passionate, you're excited about this, and that's good. It's also clear to me, and you may well know, the South Carolina legislature has said that at the university level we have to teach the founding documents and kind of the basics of the founding. I think you're in good shape. You've already got that. You will, wherever you go to school, if you go to school in South Carolina, you will have that part knocked out. So I really appreciate the effort that you and your teacher have put into this, and it shows. And I really commend you for all this work. It has paid off. Thank you.
Yes, I'd like to agree with my colleagues. I thought that you did a really good job with both your prepared statement as well as your responses to the questions. I like the fact that you had a really good and strong discussion of the Federalist position and the anti-Federalist position. You were clear. You identified some of the key players and talked about, kind of the Federalist Papers. And I thought that was really kind of important. You brought up a lot of the major issues at the time, the idea of placing limits on government, checks and balances, and the reasons behind the debate over the Bill of Rights. I really liked the way that the team worked in terms of the dynamic that you had. Everybody got involved, and you all either, kind of built upon the arguments that had been made, by your teammates, and at times you respectfully disagreed with one another, which I think is really good in terms of showing the, kind of differences of opinion that can be had on these issues, which are really complex. When you're talking and responding to the question about, what is a Republican government versus a Democratic government, I love the way you went way back in history to ancient Rome, ancient Greece, and then we're able to link it to the Federalist Papers as well. And the idea of forming the skeleton for the Republic, I thought was a nice one. So really great job. Congratulations on coming to the National Invitational.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.